Jason J. Rock Houston, and you're listening to This Is Metal on Chaotic Risk Magazine. Now, this is a new segment we have with my good friend Joe Lawson, who is the lead singer of both Dragon Lore and Scream Kings. Joe, why don't you start off by telling the audience a little bit about who you are?
All right. Well, I'm a vocalist out of Northwest Indiana, just outside of Chicago. And I got two bands, like you mentioned, Dragon Lore and Scream King, multiple releases. My first release was in 96. My most recent was January of this year with Dragon Lore. And got an album coming out hopefully later this year or possibly beginning of next year for Scream King, The Indomitable Spirit.
Wow.
And so that's kind of what where I'm at music-wise, at least.
And let me share with people why you and I decided to do this. This is, of course, for Chaotic Risk Magazine. We're calling this Is Metal because I've interviewed Joe now about 4 times for Chaotic Risk Magazine. And the last 2 times, first we interviewed him for a segment we have called On the Record, which is where we talk to musicians about some of their favorite albums. And like a lot of people, Joe had made like a top 10 list of his favorite albums. One thing that really jumped out at me right away about Joe's list is he had some really kind of hardcore metal acts that like I'm familiar with, say, such as like Sabotage and Flotsam and Jetsam. And I've heard of these bands. I'm not all that familiar. Like I probably could name a whole bunch of songs, but I was interested in talking to Joe because his influences seem to be like I said, really hardcore metal and all over the place. And he's real diverse in the bands he listens to, and he knows a lot about these bands. And I thought this is the guy we need to kind of this is perfect guy to talk to about this stuff. And so Joe and me were talking about ideas for the show, and he said, you know what, why don't we? Because I interviewed him about he's talking about Iron Maiden Somewhere in Time from 1986. We also talked about the Wasp album from I believe it came out in '94, The Headless Children. And those interviews are going to be posted in the very near future. And so, as I said tonight, it was Joe's idea, and I thought it was a great idea. Let's talk about Blood of a Nation, which is the 12th studio album by the legendary German metal band Accept. And this is an interesting album to talk about because it had been the first album Accept had done in a number of years with a new lead singer, and it got a great response, surprisingly. And just to kind of let people know what we're talking about here. The album, like I said, was the 12th studio album by the band, and it was released, I think, I believe it was, I didn't write that.
August 20th, 2010.
Oh, thanks. See, like I told people, Joe is the man to talk to. But interestingly enough, like I said, this was Accept's first album in several years, and they had a new singer, Mark Tolino, and great, just a great sounding album. So since you're the one that kind of turned me on to this, Joe, why don't we tell people, about how this album came on your radar and what you thought when you initially heard it?
Okay, well, first off, I was always a fan of Accept, and I was introduced to Accept from the classic Balls to the Wall song,
Yeah.
I think a lot of metalheads can relate to that and have a similar story there. And they kind of fell off the radar, and they took a long hiatus, and they didn't put any records out. They kind of disappeared for a little while. Yeah. And they made this comeback. Not only Blood of the Nations not only featured the new vocalist, but they also featured new drummer Stefan Schwartzman. And it was just this huge comeback, and it's unique, and the backstory, how this album came about, even with producer Andy Sneap. Andy did something kind of unique and interesting when he started working with Accept. What he did was he went and listened back to their discography of all their music, and he picked out the highlights, he picked out the strong points, and he sat down with the band and he said, this is Accept, this part right here, right there, that's Accept, this part here, and he found all their strengths in the songs and their songwriting, and he emphasized that and built off of that, and they came out with this monster new record, and it charted, it did great, critics ate it up. I mean, it just did it just caught on fire, and it brought the band back to life bigger than ever.
Oh yeah, that's the interesting thing.
And it's a great album. If you haven't listened to it, I mean, you gotta give this a listen. I mean, anybody with a metal heart out there will just eat this up and love it. It's a great record.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, you mentioned Andy Sneap produced it, and for anybody who's not aware, he also produced Judas Priest, and he's currently, when Judas Priest is out on the road these days, he's filling in for Glenn Tipton on the road, so he's doing that these days as well, so that's where you may have also heard the name Andy Sneap.
Right, and when I say the band took a break, I mean it was a significant break. Prior to Blood of the Nations, Accept didn't release a record until from 1996 till 2010. 1996 they put out Predator, and the first album to feature Mark and Stefan both was Blood of the Nations, and what a comeback! I mean, it's just. What a strong record. Great songwriting, great hooks. I mean, it's just from start to finish. It's all thriller, no filler.
Yeah, that's so true. And you know what's interesting about it is my experience with Accept is very much like yours. Is that I was a fan of all that balls to the wall stuff and a lot of the classic stuff with Udo Dirkschneider. And see, that's the thing. They briefly tried to reunite with him, and it did not, for I guess ego reasons or personality wise. It just didn't last all that long, and kind of quickly fell apart. And that's why they took all those years off, because I guess if you're going to return, you got to return with the guy that has at least capable of filling those big shoes left by Udo Dirkschneider. Because I mean, they tried it once before with David Rees, and nothing against David Rees, but that's a very interesting part of the story too. Is he did one album, and again. He, I guess, just was not the right voice for Accept. He's a very talented vocalist in his own right, and he's carried on to have somewhat of a successful solo career. He just wasn't the man for Accept, and so this was kind of like, okay, third time around, can we do it? And they really delivered the goods, because when you and me were talking about doing this show last week, I said, I'm not familiar with this stuff, so I'm going to go on YouTube. I'm going to give it a listen, and that's the best way to do something like this, because it's like I'm listening with fresh ears, and I'm like, man, I heard I remember when this album came out, there is getting great reviews, and this is why, because like you said, they took all the best parts of the classic Accept sound, and I don't think Mark was trying to be an Udo Dirkschneider clone. He just doing his thing, and that's what came out.
Yep, absolutely. There's a couple of bonus tracks that are worth mentioning also for the Japanese editions with their cool tunes. Yeah. Time Machine and Land of the Free. So those are, if you can dig around and find those are pretty cool tracks to check out too.
Yeah, and I was looking on the Wikipedia, and it said like this album, as far as the Billboard chart, it reached like number 19 on the Billboard Top Hard Rock albums. It was as far as on the Billboard Independent album, it made it as high as 41, and I guess in Germany it was like number 4 or something, but their own home country, which is kind of interesting. But it did sales wise, it did very different in different countries, which is kind of interesting.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it kind of bounced around and in different chart locations and stuff like that. But to me, honestly, none of that really has ever mattered.
Yeah.
I've never once in my life bought a record because of what a critic said.
No,
not one time.
No, but I will say this again. I bring that up only because, again, when this album came out, nobody really knew what to expect. They're like, okay, who's the new singer they got? Is he going to be able to fill those shoes by, Udo Dirkschneider? And he quickly proved that he was able to do that. And, and quite surprisingly, both Udo and Accept, they seem to be much better, apart, which is kind of interesting. You kind of got two great bands out of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Udo in his own right. I mean, of course, he was the classic original singer for Accept, and great singer, and he's had a successful career, outside of Accept, and done well and everything. And no disrespect to him, but I was just really blown away when I first heard this record. I was like, you got to be kidding me, man! These guys they came back with such a strong record. I was really shocked and blown away by it.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't anticipating.
Yeah.
I guess maybe, part of me, kind of henpecked around, with the previous Accept albums.
Yeah.
There was a song here or there that I really liked, and the rest was like, yeah, they're okay. But there was a couple that I really liked. And when I heard this record, I was like, man, every song on here just kicks ass.
And everything about this album is just full blown on metal. I mean, from the album cover, it's kind of got that little metal sign with the hands, like Ronnie James Dio used to do in Blood. But it's got like 12 great tracks. I mean, some of my favorite tracks that I was listening to for the first time, I just kind of fell in love with, was like Beat Bastards, Titanic Terror of the Abyss, title track Blood of the Nations. I mean, but just from top to bottom, like you said, it's all killer. I mean, they could have released any of the 12 tracks as a single, and I think people would have ate it up.
Right.
And see,
it really is. It's everything and more than from what you just said. Also, worth maybe mentioning is is to follow along with Mark's career. Mark came from a band called TT Quick.
Yeah.
And they've got a few records out that you can check out that might be worth giving a listen as well.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about Mark, I think, while the other guys in the band are German, I think he's an American singer.
Yeah,
I think he hails from New Jersey. I think originally is where that band came from. And the reason I bring up the chart position and the critics' love for it is because, again, like you said, before anybody heard this album, they really didn't know what to expect. And first of all, for a band that's been along that many years to come back after like a 12-year hiatus or whatever it was, and have an album sell like that, have the fans react to it like they did, it's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. I mean, it was a huge comeback, and I mean, they launched a successful run, and I don't think they've stopped. I mean, it's just been.
Yeah, they've done.
They released Blood of the Nations. They followed that with Stalingrad, and then Blind Rage, and then The Rise of Chaos. I mean, it was just one after another within close proximity, a year or two. I mean, tops. It was record after record, and they were just on fire. And those albums as well. Some really strong, great songs, man.
Yeah, they've got almost like two eras to the band, kind of like Van Halen, David Lee Roth, Sammy Hagar. It's the same band, but completely different thing at the same time. And I think a big part of Accept, I always loved the bass player. He's no longer in the band, I don't think, but Peter Baltz, he was a big part of that sound with his bass. And
he was a huge part. And in fact, there's going into the whole studio geek talk here for a minute.
Yeah.
There's a producer pack through TuneTracks.com that's put out by Andy Sneap.
Okay.
And it's his signal chain, his compressors, his little tricks that he does to get that bass sound, to get this guitar sound, to get and that's what made me buy that. Is when I heard this record and I heard the work that he did. I was like, I'm sold. I gotta have this in my studio. So I actually have that Teutonic Terror bass tone and sound.
Wow. People may be surprised
as well.
People may be surprised. I read this somewhere on the internet that Peter Baltz he played on the very first Dokken album, Breaking the Chains, because I guess that was before he played on the album, because that was before we got Jeff Pilson, I guess, right after Juan Crocier.
Oh wow, I did not know that. That's interesting. Wow. Yeah, cool.
And then he also played on Don's solo album from 1980. I think it was called Up From Ashes. He plays all the bass on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's
he's a great bass player. I mean, I give him total credit. I mean,
and then
definitely the backbone of that record, no doubt about it.
And then
the band,
of course,
killer.
Wolf Hoffman to me has always been kind of an underrated kind of guitar hero, but he.
That guy just has metal flowing out of his veins into his fingertips. I mean, just every riff he comes up with, I'm like,
And all these years too, like Accept, when you think of like legendary German bands, it's the top two are like Scorpions and Accept, but Scorpions always seem to edge them out, just a little somehow as far as getting more airplay and all that.
Yeah. I think Scorpions is a great, fantastic band, and I just think that they had more of a commercial sound.
Yeah.
They had more of a commercial viability. They radio and MTV and all of those, all of that. Business side of it kind of took more to them. I mean, naturally, and truthfully, back in the day when they were putting those records out and stuff, I mean, those to this day, those were all fantastic records as well. And to me, except just became reborn.
Yeah.
2010. Yeah, I mean, like I said, no offense to Udo, no disrespect to him, or the band's previous records, because they're all great. They really are.
Yeah, you know.
To me, I mean, it really hit home with me when I heard "Blood of the Nations." I was like, okay, I'm a major Accept fan now.
Yeah, or I'm one once again. You know, and the thing about that album, which is kind of interesting to me, not just how great sounding and what a great comeback, but being on a label like Nuclear Blast, being a metal band, being a band that's trying to make a comeback with a new singer. I remember at the time that album, not just only getting great reviews and stuff, but I remember, the advertising. You were seeing ads for it all over the place, all over the internet. I remember them talking about it on, of all places, VH1, when they had that metal show with Eddie Trunk. They were talking about it, and it was just getting great reviews. And for a band like that, they got they're from Germany. They like a lot of the hardcore European metal fans. They were digging it, and even here in the States, where they were touring all over the place at the time, where they hadn't toured in a number of years, so everything was just on an upward trajectory, if you will, at the time.
Yeah, and the thing that's unique about it is Mark's voice. I mean, he is the singer that he is, and when he came to Accept, I don't think he tried to sound like Udo, like you were saying.
Yeah.
I don't think he went into it with that mindset, or he just said, here I am, and this is what I got to offer, and it was awesome, and it fit like a glove.
It really did, and I think maybe very much like. Queensryche, when they replaced Jeff Tate, the guy they got, I think part of the reason fans were so accepting of that is because Todd Latour, he can reach those high notes just like Jeff was able to. He's got a real metal sound to what he did. He came from the band Crimson Glory, so he already had a real metal thing going with him as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and Todd Todd kind of grew into that role. With that, I think at first, and not to be disrespectful to him either, but I think he probably felt a lot of pressure, because with Queensryche, it's such a demanding, but it's such a unique vocal style that is characteristic of the band that has to be there. I mean, to a certain extent. I mean, it wouldn't sound right if it didn't.
Yeah.
If you didn't have a singer that could do something very similar to what Jeff Tate was doing, and Todd did very easily, and he came in and did all the old stuff and sounded phenomenal. But I think as they've progressed and they've put more records out and they've wrote new stuff with Todd, I think he's came into his own more. In that band and in that role, he's grown into those shoes a little bit more.
Yeah, and while we're on the subject of powerhouse vocalists, I'm sure you're aware of who Sean Peck is. He's a lead singer from Cage. He's had
I'm friends with Sean.
Yeah. I've interviewed him a number of times. I'm sure you're aware of a band that he has with Ripper Owens. It's called the Three Tremors. And I don't know if you know anything about it, but last time I was interviewing him, he shared this with me that. The idea for the Three Tremors initially came up years ago. If you remember when the Halford album came out, and Rob Halford.
Yeah, it was going to be Halford and Dickinson and Tate.
And he says they are always talking about it. They never did. He goes, I got kind of permission to go with the name because they never used it. But he's like, that's how I came up with the idea for the Three Tremors.
Right.
Yeah. And Sean's just.
It was a great marketing idea, and he's done great with it. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing what he's done with it, because they've had two releases. They had a studio album, and then when you think about getting a band with two, one great lead singer, let alone three,
Right.
And there's no egos; they're all best of friends and stuff. And then they got other projects they're doing as well. And then they had a second release, which was kind of a live release where they released 3 like kind of volumes of the material live. Each singer kind of doing the stuff live, and it just was it just made for an interesting release. But getting back to Accept, like I said, that Blood of a Nations album, just hearing that makes me want to go out and buy the other albums they did with Mark, because it sounded.
Yeah, they really are fantastic. They're great. There's so much depth and character to them, and the songwriting, the production, everything is really good. I mean, they, and it's comfortable being in a band, and when you find that producer that really pushes you and really draws out the best that you can possibly be, that maybe you're missing it, maybe you don't see it, maybe you don't hear it, and that's their job, and a producer that knows how to draw that out of you, and they can really help put that together. They found that in Andy Sneap, and every record that they've done since then, I believe Andy produced, and it's just great. They just built upon it,
And you know what's really great about listening to that Blood of a Nations album for the first time was this: it has a real band sound. And what I mean by that is, okay, you look at like those 2 albums Ripper Owens did with Judas Priest, great records and everything, but like they really didn't allow him to come in. Like Halford was no longer in, so like Glenn Tipton and KK kind of. They wrote everything. They didn't really want to give him any of the songwriting credit or whatever, or whatever the politics were. But so that is what was very different about Blood of the Nations. You have this new lead singer, and they let him come in, and he's very much a part of a songwriting process. Whereas if he hadn't been so involved in songwriting, I think it would have had a different sound to it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's singers out there that can just drop it down on a dime on command, and that's fantastic. But for the most part, everybody's human. Everybody has feelings. Everybody has emotions. Everybody, you make more of a commitment to it if you feel you're involved and you're appreciated. And your contributions mean something, and to a singer, that's really important, when you're walking into a big band like that, it's kind of intimidating, and for them to accept him and bring him on and let him do his thing was the smartest thing they could have done.
Yeah, and even so much to the point that, again, nothing against Udo Dirkschneider, because he really was a big part of that band, and he put his stamp all over it for those years he fronted the band, but interestingly enough, Mark has come in and he's become a very big part of Accept, just like Udo was. And I don't want to say that anybody's forgot about Udo, but they're certainly not missing him, if you know what I mean. Kind of like I was saying in the beginning. We get 2 great bands out of it, but
people were blown away by it, and again, if you haven't listened to it, I mean, check it out on YouTube, Spotify, whatever your poison is, Me personally, I recommend going out and buying the album.
That's what
old school. I still buy CDs, and if you want. If vinyl's your thing, I mean, buy the vinyl. It's worth it.
Yeah, I will tell you. I will go on record as saying that. And I'll tell you, Joe. The reason I went on YouTube to check this stuff out is because I didn't know if I was going to go out have enough time to go out and purchase the album. And interestingly enough, I listened to all 12 tracks on the album, and like you said, I just fell in love with it. And that's exactly what I'm planning to do next is go on Amazon and purchase the album. But I went on YouTube. For a specific point, not just so I could hear the album, but to kind of educate myself on, because I didn't want to be talking to you today and sound like I have no clue what I'm talking about, So I'm like,
exactly.
Yeah. So it's useful for that, and so I'm really glad I did, because like this album did not disappoint, and based on what you're telling me, the other albums he did, I'm sure I'll go check it out. Now that's kind of a cool thing about what we're doing here is kind of putting a spotlight on some of this great music that people either have forgotten about or might not even be aware of. Because again, a lot of people when they hear the name Accept, that's exactly what they think: Udo Dirkschneider or balls to the wall. But they've had a life after that, and I'm kind of interested.
They sure have. it's been quite a vibrant one.
Yeah, and even when this album came out in 2010, I mean, we still had that metal show, but that's about it. I mean, they didn't even have a vehicle like Headbangers Ball or anything, and this album was still selling all over the place, or at least getting airplay. And
well, that's because, like you said, it's a band effort, and it's strong, in your face metal, loud and proud, and it's always and metal like that has always worked. It's always been about the fans, and the fans. If you have something like that, fans will embrace it, and that's exactly what they did with Blood of the Nations.
And I think why Accept continues to be followed by their fans, and that is because. Except very much could have pulled a Van Halen in the sense that, where Sammy Hagar's like, I'm never going to play any David Lee Roth song. Their classic stuff stands up on its own, and the new stuff stands up on its own. And if you were to go see the band live, they play a little bit of everything, which I think is cool for the fans. Not denying one era of a band over another.
Right. When you have a catalog like that, I mean. That's got to be really nice and convenient and cool, because there's the staple songs, or the hits that they probably got to play, or they feel obligated to play, I'm sure. But there's such a variety of stuff that they can switch up the set list, and they can keep it interesting for themselves and the fans, because they have so much to choose from.
Yeah, and see, that's what I think really makes Mark stand out as a vocalist as well, is because. Not only does he have his own era of a band, but he's able to get up on stage and perform any Accept song pretty much from any era of a band, and that's kind of what the fans want to hear.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so
that's what I want to hear. I know that.
Yeah, so I was curious on that Blood of the Nations tour over the last couple of years. Have you seen Accept live or at all?
Unfortunately, I have not. That's one of the bands I really wish I would have got to see them.
Yeah.
Years ago when they were on the Blood of the Nations tour, I had an opportunity to do a show with them.
Wow.
But it didn't pan out.
Yeah.
And I really regret that. I wish that it would have worked out and we would have got to play with them. That would have been really cool.
And let me obviously you're an Accept fan, and like I said, you turned me on to some of the newer stuff, so I thank you for that, Joe. But how big of a fan are you of the Udo Dirkschneider band? Udo.
You know what? To be totally honest with you, I'm not all that familiar with them. I know he's put out albums. I know he's had a career afterwards, and all of that. But I'm not really familiar with them. That's something that'd be some homework for me.
Yeah, see that says it all right there. And again, if you're a metal fan, you pretty much, if you heard Udo Dirkschneider, you automatically think the ex-lead singer of Accept. But or even Balls to Wall, like we were saying. See that's the thing. He's had a whole career since leaving Accept, and that's kind of interesting. Like I said, we get two great bands if you even have time to listen to both bands. But each band has been able to kind of go on and find success on their own, which is a great thing, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of bands that. Have parted ways with different members, and that have their own versions or their own solo careers or whatnot. I mean, if it's good music, it's good music. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Well, one band that comes to mind, when you talking about bands having two different versions, is Great White. And I'll tell you a funny thing is I recently seen an ad just I think today or yesterday on Facebook for. The two lead singers of Great White are going to be doing some kind of acoustic show. You're going to have Terry Lewis and Jack Russell like doing an acoustic show together, and they're going to be performing, I think, some of their own hits as well as the Great White songs that they performed.
Oh wow, that's really going to be odd or different.
Yeah. And see, Great White is interesting thing about Great White is if anybody knows anything about their history, if there's all the like big hits where they were pretty much are like a blues-based band now. They a lot closer to what Led Zeppelin's doing. But if you go back to like their first, I think, 2 releases, they were much more of a metal band back in the early '80s, and they've kind of morphed into what they are.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. But And then see, the interesting thing about Great White is they've had 3 lead singers, and they have this guy Mitch Malloy now, and he's a pretty good singer in his own right. But I think when you go through that many singers, and then like in my case, like they have Jack Russell's Great White and they have Great White. They're both decent bands in their own right. But I think a lot of people, when they think of Great White, they think of Jack Russell as the voice of Great White.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. And now, I know you're a big fan of Ripper Owens. We were talking about him a little tonight. I was curious, like when he first joined Judas Priest, what did you think of like that Jugulator album?
I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm a huge fan of it. To me, it fits right in the Priest catalog, and it makes sense as a natural progression from where they left off with Painkiller. So I wasn't surprised so much in the direction. You know, I mean, I was surprised with the record itself, but. I kind of anticipated or expected them to do something along that line, so, and then, when I heard Tim's voice on it, I was just like, wow, man, they got a killer guy to replace Halford.
Yeah, and
he's a great singer, man. He is, he really is.
I think he just, it's like he put out a solo album that was like really terrific. I don't want, he just got so many projects, I guess, going on that he just can't find the time to, we'll have another conversation. Another conversation just on him alone.
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, the only and then he also did like an album with Yngwie Malmsteen, but that didn't last too long, unfortunately.
Yeah, just one record. Not too many people last a long time in his band. It seems like At least singer wise, they don't. Not too many.
Now I gotta also ask before we end this. We're kind of all over the place, I know, but like I said, you're into a lot of this hardcore metal, and I know you're a King Diamond fan. I was just kind of curious, like, were you as much of a Merciful Fate fan as you were a King Diamond fan?
You know what? Not at first. I was introduced to King Diamond first, and I loved the stuff that he was doing, and the stories and the theatrics and all that. And, the musicianship was just off the charts, crazy awesome. Yeah. And the vocal style I like, of course, and there's so much to be offered there. And a Merciful Fate for me came afterwards. I mean, now I love Merciful Fate, but I was so engulfed in what King Diamond was doing that I just was like, oh yeah, Merciful Fate, that was his band before King Diamond. Okay, whatever. But it wasn't actually until probably about maybe even 7-8 years ago that I actually really listened to Merciful Fate and was like, holy shit, okay, I get it now.
The reason I bring King Diamond up is like I said, I know you're a fan, and interestingly enough, I'm not sure if you're aware, but King Diamond's re-releasing a lot of Metal Blade Records, I think is the one doing it, but they're re-releasing a lot of the King Diamond catalog. Like I just ordered it off of Amazon, the Eye, and it's a cool little package. It's like and then you open up the CD, looks like a little mini record. It's just cool with packaging, and then they're also re-releasing a lot of the Merciful Fate stuff. If you wanted to check it out, when I went online last night, I was on YouTube, and they had a new Merciful Fate music video for the track, I think it's called Evil, off of the album Melissa. And
awesome.
Again, it's kind of a cool like live performance. But they're re-releasing a lot of his stuff, and if you're a fan, I think it'd be worth checking out.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And anything else you'd like to talk about before we wrap this up tonight, Joe? And I just want people to know this is kind of a first installment of this thing we're doing called This Is Metal. And Joe's just the perfect guy you can see to talk to about this stuff. And him and I go back and forth on ideas. And so I want people to understand it's a combination of me and him. But I got to really give Joe the credit because he's come up with a lot of, like for tonight's topic, the main topic he wanted to talk about was Accept and Blood of the Nations. And I think we covered that pretty much. And unless there's anything you want to say before we end this tonight, Joe.
Yeah, get out there and buy that record, man, and check out all the rest of the albums that Accept has released since then. It's great metal.
And I think I think to let the people know, have a little something to look forward to. Next time we do this, Joe, this was your idea again, and I thought it was a great one, oddly enough, because we started talking about Queensryche for a little bit tonight, and you're telling me I want to kind of talk about Queensryche and the two singers and kind of albums they each did and stuff. And interesting enough is Todd Latour. He's getting ready to release a solo album, I think I heard. But in any event, he went online recently saying, "Oh wow, I can't believe I've been fronting Queensryche for 8 years," and kind of celebrating that. And at the same time, I seen something where Jeff Tate, he's Operation Mindcrime now. He's got that going. But they're supposed to put out a 30th anniversary of Empire, and his band was going to kind of celebrate that. This year, I think they put it off till next year. They're going to go tour behind that. So there's a lot happening in the Queensryche world right now, and so we'll have plenty to talk about, and probably even maybe even go as long as an hour next time, because we could even get into the lawsuit and all that. But Queensryche is never a dull moment, so I think that's what we're going to talk about next time we get together, Joe. So thanks for doing this.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, take care, buddy. Bye bye.